Have you ever wondered about the extent of Noah's flood? Was it a global catastrophe or merely a local event? The biblical account of Noah's flood, found in the book of Genesis, recounts a deluge of epic proportions. According to the narrative, God, seeing the wickedness of man, decides to cleanse the earth with a great flood, sparing only Noah, his family, and a pair of every living creature. The floodwaters covered the earth for 150 days, obliterating all life not aboard the ark. But here's where the debate begins. How far-reaching was this deluge? Was it a global catastrophe that wiped out all life on every continent? Or was it a local event confined to a specific geographical region? The interpretation of the flood's scale has been a subject of immense debate among scholars, theologians, and scientists. One school of thought argues for a global flood. They point to the Genesis narrative itself, which uses universal language, suggesting that the flood covered the whole earth. This interpretation is often associated with a literal reading of the biblical text. According to this view, the flood was a cataclysmic event that reshaped the entire planet, leaving no corner untouched. On the other hand, some propose a local flood theory. This perspective contends that while the flood was indeed a massive disaster, it was geographically limited. Proponents of this view argue that the language of Genesis, while seemingly universal, should be understood within its ancient Near Eastern context, where the whole earth might refer to the known world of the original audience. As we delve into this intriguing question, we'll explore compelling arguments from both sides. Whether global or local, one thing is clear. The flood was a significant event, not just in the life of Noah, but in the narrative of humanity's relationship with the divine. It's a story that continues to captivate us, challenging us to ponder the mysteries of our past and the nature of our existence. First, let's consider the global flood perspective. The global flood theory is a viewpoint that suggests Noah's flood was a worldwide event, engulfing every mountain and valley, every creature and plant, every village and city. This perspective is primarily rooted in biblical passages, particularly Genesis 7 verses 19 to 23, which vividly describe the extent of the flood. Here the text tells us, all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. Every living thing that moved on land perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. This description seems to leave little room for interpretation. If we take these words at face value, the flood was indeed a global event. But what makes this perspective even more intriguing is that it's not just the Bible that speaks of a catastrophic flood. Fascinatingly, flood narratives are found in various cultures around the world, from the Epic of Gilgamesh in ancient Mesopotamia to the Hindu story of Manu, from the Greek Deucalion myth to the Chinese tale of Gunyu. These stories, each unique in their details, yet strikingly similar in their core narrative, suggest a flood of epic proportions that wiped out most of life on Earth. Some proponents of the global flood theory argue that these shared narratives point to a shared historical event. They suggest that these flood myths are echoes of the same worldwide catastrophe, passed down through generations and molded by cultural and linguistic differences over time. However, it's worth noting that this is just one interpretation. Critics argue that these flood stories may simply reflect a common human experience of local floods, or perhaps a shared psychological metaphor for chaos and rebirth. The global flood theory certainly holds some intriguing points, but what about the local flood perspective? Now let's turn our attention to the local flood perspective. This viewpoint suggests that the flood described in the book of Genesis was not a global event, but rather a large-scale regional flood. Here's how this theory unfolds. Those who propose this perspective cite specific passages in the Bible that could be interpreted to support this interpretation. Take for instance Genesis 8:9. It states, "But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark. For the waters were still on the face of the whole earth." If we pause and ponder over the phrase, the whole earth, it could be interpreted to mean the whole known earth to Noah and his family, rather than the entire planet. The local flood theory also finds support in the realm of science. Geologists have pointed out that there is little evidence of a worldwide flood, but there are numerous indications of local floods throughout history. For example, around the time of Noah, the Black Sea region experienced a significant flooding event. This flood, while devastating and widespread, didn't cover the entire globe. The diversity of animal life also gives weight to the local flood theory. A global flood would have necessitated the gathering of every single animal species into the ark. However, the vast variety of species, many of which are indigenous to specific regions, makes this seem implausible. The local flood theory simplifies this issue by suggesting that Noah only needed to gather animals local to his region. Even the size of the ark, as described in the Bible, lends more credibility to this perspective. Considering the dimensions provided, it seems more feasible that the ark could hold a selection of local fauna, rather than every species from around the globe. The local flood theory presents some strong arguments too. So, where does this leave us? The answer, as we'll find out, lies within the delicate balance of faith, interpretation, and scientific understanding. Both theories carry significant theological implications. Let's delve into these implications. From the perspective of a global flood, we find ourselves confronted with a profound demonstration of God's judgment. This narrative paints a picture of a world so steeped in wickedness that God felt compelled to cleanse it entirely, sparing only Noah and his family, along with a pair of each animal species. This perspective stresses the importance of obedience to God's commands. Noah, heeding God's instructions, built an ark and was saved from the catastrophic flood. It serves as a stark reminder that disobedience can lead to dire consequences. Now let's turn to the theological implications of a local flood. This view might not be as dramatic as a worldwide deluge, but it contains its own deeply meaningful lessons. In this narrative, God's mercy comes to the forefront. Yes, there was judgment, but it was localized, suggesting a more measured response to human wickedness. God, in his wisdom, chose not to wipe out all of humanity, but rather to focus his judgment on a specific region. This perspective also underscores God's care for his creation. It paints a picture of a God who, despite his disappointment with human behavior, chooses a path of restraint, preserving the majority of his creation. Another interesting theological point to consider is the covenant. In both narratives, God makes a covenant with Noah, promising never to flood the earth again. This promise, symbolized by the rainbow, is a powerful testament to God's faithfulness and his love for humanity, regardless of whether the flood was global or local. Examining these two perspectives side by side, we see a God of judgment and mercy, a God who values obedience but also cherishes his creation. We see a God who, in the face of human wickedness, still chooses to make a covenant of love and protection with humanity. Clearly, both viewpoints offer deep insights into the nature of God and his relationship with humanity. So, was Noah's flood global or local? This question has been the center of our discourse, and now, we find ourselves at the crossroads of interpretation. We've journeyed through the valley of perspectives, exploring the vast landscape of theories, evidence, and beliefs. On one side, we uncovered the global flood perspective, which suggests that the deluge was indeed worldwide. This viewpoint draws heavily from the literal interpretation of the biblical account in Genesis, where it is written that all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. Proponents of this theory underscore the universality of flood myths among diverse cultures as corroborative evidence, implying a shared global event in the distant past. On the other flank, we delved into the local flood perspective. Advocates of this theory propose that the flood was a regional event, confined to the Mesopotamian basin, or a similar locale. The existence of thriving ancient civilizations outside the supposed flood zone, uninterrupted in their timelines, lends weight to this interpretation. Moreover, the original Hebrew word eretz, often translated as earth, can also mean land or country, which could suggest a localized incident. But as we stand on this precipice of understanding, we must remember that the flood narrative is more than a historical account or a geological puzzle. It's a story imbued with profound theological implications, echoing themes of divine judgment, human wickedness, redemption, and the promise of a fresh start. It's these enduring messages that resonate through the ages, transcending the confines of time, culture, and geography. In the end, whether Noah's flood was global or local may be a matter of personal interpretation and belief. What's most important is the message and lessons we draw from this ancient narrative. The flood of Noah, in its essence, is a testament to the power of faith, the possibility of renewal, and the enduring pursuit of truth.